Te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora.
Thank you, Lizette. Apologies. We have an apology for Pamela Story, and I'll put a apology for Chris Hughes for lateness. No others, I believe. Happy to move. Jen, thank you. Happy to second. Ben, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? So carried. Confirmation of the agenda. As it sits, we only have a couple of items on the agenda today, so I'm happy to move those. And sorry? And thanks for the second, Jen. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? So carried. Any disclosures of interest or anyone relating to anything on the agenda? No. I take that as a no. Right. Oh, this is the. We've got some minutes coming in, haven't we? Health and safety. I think we're all well aware of the health and safety for the building. So we'll move that. Oh, right. Okay. Yep. Sorry. Yep. That confirmation of those previous minutes from the 14th of August was in that. So we'll move on to our only item of the day, which is the Waikato Regional Council submission on the proposals for regulations for natural hazard information on limbs. I'll hand over to you, Lizette, for the introductions, and then the team for some explanations.
Thank you. So, as Councillor Mara has said, this is the WRC submission on, or proposed submission on the proposals for regulations for natural hazard information on limbs, and that comes via the regulations to the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act, the LGOIMA. We are generally in support of this move. There are a number of good reasons for doing so. We've just got some matters of administration and clarity that we would like to submit on. Alejandro is joined by Whitney and Derek from our resilience and spatial information teams, respectively. And without further ado, I'll pass on to Alejandro.
Thank you, Sid. With your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll just do a brief introduction of the paper and highlight a couple of things in terms of the submission. So I've asked Whitney and Derek to be here today to help me answer questions about either some of the hazard information that we have or the special elements of that data that we actually hold. In terms of your agenda, so the report is in pages 12 to 15. Submission in pages 16 to 30 to highlight. We've made some general comments, so that's our pages 18 and 19. Then we answer the questionnaire in pages 20 to 26 and did a few clause-by-clause recommendations and a table on pages 26 to 30. In July 2023, the New Zealand Parliament passed into law changes to the LGOIMA. So this is the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act of 1987, of which we actually made a submission as a council in support of the changes. These changes will come into effect on the 1st of July of 2025. The main thing to do with this time frame for it to coming into effect is that it was meant to allow the government to prepare regulations, which is a matter we're submitting on today, under the section 55 of the Act, and to give local authorities time to prepare for these changes. Now, the submission that we made in February 2023 is referenced in your agenda paper. Key changes that were introduced to legislation. We have sections 44B, C, and D. For 44B is that natural hazard information is to be included in land information memoranda, the LIMS. So this is a requirement for territorial authorities and unitary councils. In section 44C means that regional councils must provide the territorial authority with natural hazard information. So that's an obligation for us. Then key to all of this system is section 44D, which is that territorial authorities and regional councils are protected against certain actions when providing the information in good faith. So this is a sort of limit on liability against civil and criminal actions when we provide the information, and we, as territorial authorities and regional councils, in good faith.
Can I stop you there? If you
Yes.
don't mind, if we do, I know it's going to be fairly short, so if we can do questions sort of as we go, as you bring things up. But that was one of my questions, was around that legal liability and what that actually means in fact. So I understand probably with natural justice that a landowner will have some form of recourse, but are we commenting around, or do we understand the risk of legal challenge to any information that we supply?
Thank you. So if it's okay, I'll just read out actually what Section 44D says, and then I'll answer the question. But Section 44D says that a territorial authority or regional council is not liable in civil or criminal proceedings for making available in good faith information in case of a territorial authority information in the limb, and in the case of a regional council information to a territorial authority. So the main portion of this section is good faith. And then that also ties to the way we actually manage the information. So the main thing with the Logoima is that it is about making information accessible. So a lot of the information that we actually hold is now discoverable under the Logoima. What the Act is doing is actually removing some of where the limitations for councils to actually make the decision to make that information available. So the ability of somebody to have a legal recourse will remain, but that the bar has been raised higher because of the limitation on liability that we have. So now it would be just, I anticipate it would be an action before the High Court for matters of law. But then as long as you have the bar of good faith, that is the main, say, operative warning that we need to look at.
Thanks for that, Leandro.
And if I follow on
Yeah.
from that,
Yeah,
the good faith aspect is the aspect where we just need to be able to defend why we would put a hazard listed in some way, because in the same way that I've heard Tracy talk about, we've got to defend ourselves in environment court in order why we're setting a policy, for example, evidence or with community voice. This good faith aspect is just being able to defend that you said it's going to flood there because you've actually got some data or you've got some reasons. And if you've got that, you're fairly well protected, is what I understand. Okay, thanks. I see nodding.
I
was just going to ask as well, is this because of what happened down in Kapiti, where people challenged the actual limb information that was going on, their titles?
Correct, in terms of the legislative changes that will come into effect. So that was one of the big drivers. That was part of the regulatory impact statement that we had with that amendment bill. Yes.
Because they didn't just challenge the fact it was going on, they challenged the actual information that was provided, saying it was incorrect, didn't they? They got geological surveys that showed that they thought it was incorrect.
Correct. There was a number of challenges. So this is in relation to the Shand lines in Severe Kapiti Coast. The main thing to rescue is that when the judge looked at the information, the conclusion was that it was information that was factual, it was peer reviewed, it was checked, and it corresponded geographically and spatially to the properties. Now, the merits of that information to be used for something else, that was another matter of discussion. But in terms of that Logoima requirement, that's what the judge found. And from what we could see in the information that supported the changes to the Act, it was essentially just making sure that that judicial decision translated into an easier pathway for councils to put that information out, to make the information known. Yes.
So if we provide information that shows in Warren's area, half of Thames is going to go underwater and it goes on people's limbs, as long as we've justified how we get to that information, is safe under this ruling, provided it's in good faith and it's based on fact.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So correct. And also the regulations have now spelled out some of the requirements that we need to have in terms of the information.
Okay.
And part of our submission is actually saying, look, we see the requirements of how the data should be explained, and we suggested some additional ones to say, it's just making it clear for people that it might be an indication of something, the regional scale or the local scale. So the information is nuanced. At the moment, the regulations as they are proposed do provide for some of the nuance, but our submission suggests changes to actually make it more understandable for people to kind of know, okay, yeah, it shows the flood extent, but is from regional information. So it's only an indication of something that we know about the land or the area, but it might not be the whole story.
So just touching on a point that you've just raised there around plain language, and there's a lot of technical stuff in a lot of these reports and things like that. How we bring that into plain language seems to me to be a sort of a, but it's a bit, I suppose I'm trying to get to the fact that a lot of the stuff we can supply is technical information. You can't dumb it down into plain language. You're going to lose the content out of it, I guess. So yeah, just noting that whole plain language thing seems that they've suggested.
Yeah, I'll make a comment on that one. So yeah, that is where in our submission we have recommended that if we do have to keep some technical information or technical words such as 1% AEP, that therefore there is a link to a definition of exactly what does that mean in some sort of, easy to understandable way. Also with regards to the plain language summaries of report information, as of 1st of July next year, any new report information that we commission that is attached to a natural hazard information, from 1st of July next year, there will have to be a plain language summary, but any reports that are currently already been approved and finalised, we do not have to provide a plain language summary at this stage. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Whitney. Yeah,
Just-
Ben.
Yeah, just briefly, in terms of the limb information, are we projecting out to 2050 or 2100? How far out are we going in terms of projections on possibilities of flooding?
Yeah, so it depends on how we've commissioned the different types of modelling moving forward. So it is stated in there that we are including the impact of climate change through how the impact of climate change projections are impacting the hazard information that we are putting onto those limbs. So yeah, that is coming down to particularly what climate change scenarios or projections we are including in the different hazard modelling that we're commissioning moving forward.
We specify what the time frame is.
So if we if we are selecting specific projections for our climate change modelling, they will be made available and the information, and this is what has been selected to do that modelling for. Yeah.
And was really just in terms of you, Warren, does this align with what the Thames Shoreline Management Plan is? Is that the same sort of documentation?
That modelling, yeah, and timeframes is part of that information. Chris?
Yeah, look, probably sort of related to this. Who is providing the base information for this modelling, and how is it being authenticated, and how are we proving that the data has got some validity? And I'm asking this question quite specifically because I'm working in a catchment at the moment where they're being told one thing in terms of what you can expect the stop bank levels to be at in 100 years' time. And the guys in the catchment are saying, well, if that's the case, then the whole of the North Island is going to be underwater, so why are we bothering? So I'm really interested in knowing where this information is coming from, how we prove its validity, and who's testing it.
Good question. So a lot of the information which is currently available on the hazards portal has already gone through a very vigorous peer review process of when that modelling was generated and how that modelling information was generated. I think your question there is around future pieces of information that we are commissioning or modelling, both now and into the future. And we follow central government's guidance around different projections that we should be using, and the new climate change projections coming through, like the new SSP projections, downscaled information that's come through. And we do have a very vigorous peer reviewing process in which we do get technical people to review that for us. And when we're working with communities, such as through the adaptation project, such as the Hauraki Plains adaptation project, we will be taking that modelling out to the community, and we're asking the community before we finalise any of that information, does this actually show what you're seeing on the ground in terms of the base information of, when I say base information, the current flood hazard information. So we need to get a really good understanding of how and where it currently floods now, and then we add the climate change projections on top of that. And I think we're all aware climate change projections have a lot of uncertainty around them. So there's a big range of information that we can get from there, but we are working closely with, particularly around our community adaptation projects, of sitting down with that community and getting them to check and validate that what we're showing them as current day flooding is actually correct.
I suspect that might have been the answer I was going to receive. Thank you. It doesn't actually address the issue that concerns me, and that's that we're asking ratepayers to commit to significant capital expenditure now, which is going to be future-proof for them over the next, this is life of asset for 80 to 100 years, all right? So if we're telling them that you've got to build your stop banks 750 centimetres higher than what they are at the moment, that means it's got implications for the structure that they're having to build and the capacity of the pumps that are being installed. You know, it makes a huge difference. And of course, that then flows back in an economic sense to what you do with this land. Should you walk away from it now and leave it, or should you assume that's going to be, and what's going to happen? When you talk to the guys on the ground, they say that's nonsense. We've been here for 60 years. We know what we've seen to date, and there's been no change in the water levels. And if what you're saying is true, then the whole of the lower Waikato is going to be underwater. It just, you know, like, just changes the dynamics of what we're dealing with. So my question is, what do we rely on when we're talking to these people and our catchment people are doing the design work for these new infrastructure works? Because I can see that we're going to have some serious conflict.
Thanks, Chris. I think that comes back to a conversation that's going on, obviously, in ICM and will carry to go on. So it's probably, although the information we are providing towards LIMS has that information within it, it's a piece that we need to carry on working with to make sure that we're using the most up-to-date data and relative and taking on board what Whitney said around making sure that we're speaking to landowners, seeing what they're seeing on the ground, and then looking at what figures we are using for modelling, et cetera, going forward around climate change.
Yes, I'm just asking the question why we haven't been talking to the landowners now.
Yeah. Jen?
Yeah, no, it's all really educational, getting your answers, thanks. But ultimately, I think it's a good submission. I don't think I could add much to it. It's kind of technical in nature, right? So I think if it didn't have the contentious nature through it, it could easily have been a staff submission, I think. The thing I wanted to clarify, because it is really important, you point out in here the hazard versus risk terminology. I think a lot of people do confuse the two. Just to double check that the hazard is, say, it is flooding. The risk is kind of the rate or the scale or the frequency. It's kind of that likelihood part of a risk matrix. Is that right? Or is risk? Do you want to just define that for us again?
Yeah, sure. So the hazard can also refer to the likelihood of that hazard occurring, e.g. a 1% AEP flood event.
Sure.
What I put up in here is when we're talking about risk, we're talking about the impact that hazard is having on a piece of infrastructure or the environment. And it's very clearly says in the regulation that we are to provide hazard information and that we do not have to provide risk information. And they were using the word risk interchangeably where they should have been using hazard. So we're just clarifying them on, just make sure that you're just using the right terminology instead of a hazard versus the risk, because if they start talking about risk, that opens up a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, different amount of work and scale. All right, and then I really like your calls for standardisation. Obviously, for people buying properties in any part of the country, similar standards for how LIMS are written, educational thing we can all together rather than. You have in there on page 20, in question 1, and then you answered in the comments. In the second paragraph, it says regulations need clear guidance or standardised direction. I was the guidance and just OFA needs direction, because you're kind of making the argument elsewhere in the document that guidance is not enough. I was just wondering if you wanted to go stronger. Either want it that way or we. While you're looking for that, I'll just scan my document. And just for Ben and Chris, I like that it says in here, we suggest adding information on time frame used for any. That's a really, we could even chuck the word strongly in front of it. I think that's people's understanding. But yeah, pretty much agree with a whole lot of, I think because we always like to put examples in, there was the piece on page 24, we've got a list of A, B, C, D, and B spoke specifically to any including any information centered around a community adaptation plan that's been adopted. So we could example for make it connect with the people that are reading the submission. It's a real project.
Yeah, it is a good point. Thanks, Jen. That yeah, wherever we can, it just shows that we're part of that in that space and doing it. Yeah, so it just always helps for any examples that can come through. I'll get you to carry on, Alejandro, once you've made those notes.
So, we were almost there, but as you can see, this mission emphasizes the importance of providing the information to community. So it's essentially making that information available as the first step into getting people to understand what are some of the things that happen to that land. So we support the collaborative approach that the regulations have in essentially making sure that information we provide is of use to the district. Key points in our submission, so we ask for clear direction, some stressing the importance of technical terminology, so correctly distinguishing between hazard and risk. Some of the capacity limitations that we have, so local government authorities may have limited capacity to carry out some of this work, and this is talking about smaller territorial authorities. In that space is where either guidance or standards become really, really important, because it's just the best way to make sure that they know what to do clearly. And in many instances, we anticipate that clear guidance and national consistency will lead to less expenditure on consultant costs. So you won't have many consultants developing many different models. It's just going to be kind of a more uniform approach to the preparation of some of that information. In terms of general comments, I'll highlight the criteria for relevance comment that we did, and it was proposing that there's the development of a criteria to determine what technical reports and information should be included in the LIM. So this is not a disagreement with any information could go in the LIM, and at the moment as it is, it could be a lot of information. So that is the reason why we're suggesting that the government should think of some criteria to make sure that the LIM is just not a very extensive document, because we have documentation on natural hazards going decades, and we will have more information as the system progresses and we get more understanding. So that's the reason behind that submission point. It's not to say that the information should not be included, but a more conscientious exercise should be made so that people actually get the most relevant information in front of them and not just everything, because it can be quite overwhelming, even for us as practitioners, when we look at some of the information in some of the areas. That's it in terms for the introduction. So I have to take more questions to you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just a couple more from me. That regulation 16 around the age of reports and requirement to update. How do we see that process going forward with obviously with our capacity? And then also, I guess the question is around sort of an indication on how much extra work this is going to create council, and if you any comment around that.
So
I think it was Reg 16 and their actual document that came out. I clicked on that and read through that. But yeah, just something around obviously the age of our reports, which anything we provide will have an age and time date on it. Is there any requirement going forward to update that information within a certain time frame? You know,
from the regulations and the act, there's no requirement for us to update the information. So it's only for us to pass on the information that we have.
Okay, currently, yep. So I just, yeah, so my question, the back side of my question is probably more any more input that we're going to have to put in time-wise, et cetera, from a council perspective, you know, what that may entail.
Correct. Through you, Mr. Chair, the Act and the regulations do not impose any kind of requirement for us to undertake any further assessment, either on terms of updating the hazard information or carrying out any additional information to understand the risk.
Yeah, so it's, to me, it sounds like it is pretty straightforward that the district councils will come through. They've got access to our hazard portal. They can push that information through, et cetera. So it's, for us, it's really business as usual, but just clarifying some of the stuff within it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Whitney.
I was just going to add on through that. We have looked at how our hazards portal was set up to ensure that we're meeting these regulations, so the district council can make sure that they're meeting them. And we're actually in a really, really good spot. Our hazards portal's in a really good spot. All of our publicly available information is already on there, set up really well through the spatial team. There's a little bit of work that we will need to do just to make sure that it's in plain language, the conversation that we had before,
Yeah.
and gathering some of those reports that sit behind them and providing those to the district council. But in terms of the input from, I think from the council side, I don't see a huge resource until the 1st of July next year. It'll just be when new data sets come available, just be coordinating with the TAs and telling them like, hey, this new information's up on the hazards portal and providing them with those reports.
Awesome, thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I don't sit on this committee, so I haven't read your report in full, but when you've mentioned that there are specified things that you would like on the limb, have you documented what you think government should put down? The point you just made earlier about, have you identified what are the 4 key things we think should go on?
You, Mr. Chair, so I anticipate this refers to Regulation 9, so that speaks to the minimum requirements in relation to a technical report. So this is how the limb should reflect the information that is contained in a technical report. So the suggestions that we make, so that is in page 27 of the agenda pack, on the kind of bottom of the page. One is the time frame used to develop any projections or model data. The other one is to note if the report links to a particular data set, which is mapped on the land information memoranda. And the last one that we request is to add the limitations and disclaimers of the report or reference to that section in the technical report. Essentially, as I said, making sure that people understand the scale, the time that the report was prepared on, and then any of the limitations that it has in respect to understanding what the hazard is for either the area, the property, or the regional level.
Do you think that covers what you raised earlier about standardization?
So to an extent, the regulation itself covers what is in terms of the standardization. So we agree with that. Like I said, we're just adding a few more subsections that will make that clearer for people. So yes.
I'd be happy to move. But
Okay, I'll
unless
just,
there are more questions.
Lizette, do you just want to touch on that item 14, just a slight change of wording from what's in front of you? That's all. Just something staff have come up with prior to this.
Yes, just upon review on page 29, the item 14, we noted that we had suggested territorial authorities must ensure that it does not alter, and we had the wording of the information, etc. But we would like to remove the 3 words, the wording of the information, as we realise that information is not only wording. In this case, it will also be mapping or more spatial information. So just not just wording. So just removing the wording part.
Cool, so you're aware of that. So with the motion in front of us, we have a mover. What I will suggest is we remove Tracy May's name from there, as Lizette has her delegation. This has got to go out prior to Tracy coming back to work from being away. So just with that, I'm happy to second. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Thank you very much, team. Lizette, I'll get you to close with the karakia. Thank you.
Unuhia, unuhia mai te urutapu nui. Kia wātea, kia mama, te ngākau, te tinana, te hinenaro, I te ara takatū, koia rā e rongo, e whakaira ake ki runga, kia tina, haumie, huie, tai kie.
Thank you very much. I'll declare the meeting closed at 2:32. Thank you very much, staff and councillors, for attending. Class dismissed. Yeah.